Hello, I'm David Lockington, Music Director of your Pasadena Symphony and Pops, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the third virtual concert in our Pasadena Presents series. Our featured artist is pianist Inon Barnatan, who play on both pieces and will be accompanied by musicians from the Pasadena Symphony. And here they are: Amy Hirschberger, Nancy Roth, Susanna Giordano-Gignac, Nadine Hall, and Peter Dubrovsky. Today we're presenting two masterpieces by two of the greatest pianists that ever lived. Both Chopin and Rachmaninoff were romantic pianist composers. Now, most composers were pianists until Berlioz, who was a guitarist and flute player. And some would say that his originality grew out of the fact that his hands weren't drawn to familiar pianistic patterns. These are two great romantic composers. So, the roots of Romanticism. Well, Mozart prepared the path for Beethoven to be the first true so-called romantic composer, and Chopin, Schubert, Schumann, and Mendelssohn were the next generation, each with their own more intimate expression compared to Beethoven's heroic style. By the time Rachmaninoff hit his stride, the Romantic period, especially after the First World War, had been swept aside by the Cubist equivalent in music. But his nostalgic extension of Tchaikovsky's melodic style is so compelling that it has continued to feed audiences regardless of former academic upturned noses. Other composers from Europe who wrote in a traditional style came to the States between the wars and infused their romanticism into the movie industry. The reality is that all music is romantic. All music speaks to passion and obsession, whether of person or God. The Romantic period just expanded the language and scope of music into the darker reaches of the human soul. Now back to Chopin, who was pretty obsessive, like most artists, and who suffered ill health from childhood. And the last 10 years of his life were particularly hard as he struggled with tuberculosis. He was also an expat from Poland living in Paris. Even though Chopin's father was French, he never felt comfortable speaking the language, and in fact landed in Paris almost by accident. He left the beginning of a successful career just before the Polish uprising against the Russians in 1830, at the age of 20. And his passport visa said en route to London via Paris. But it was in Paris that he became one of the first celebrity artists, like Paganini and Liszt, achieving this on the strength of about 30 sporadic recitals over roughly 16 years. Like Liszt, his love life became a feature of social gossip, especially during his often difficult relationship with Amandine Dupin, who wrote under the pseudonym of the very famous and political Georges Sand. Her novel of 1847, Lucrezia Floriani, presents an unflattering portrait of Chopin, which must have been very difficult for him to read as he helped correct the proofs. He lived close by to Liszt and performed with him a number of times, the first being a fundraiser by Berlioz for his Shakespearean actress wife, Harriet Smithson, who was seriously in debt. While he was a stunning performer, however, he was disinclined to play in larger halls and felt most at home in the aristocratic salons of the first part of the 19th century, where literature, philosophy, and music were presented and discussed. His virtuosity was of a different ilk to Liszt's, who was a showman who made ladies swoon. Chopin, on the other hand, seduced with subtle shades and colorations, with oblique turns of harmonies and phrases. Sadly, his friendship with Liszt turned sour after Chopin heard him add flamboyant additions to his music in a recital. The version of Chopin's first piano concerto you'll hear today is similar to how it would have been performed in one of those elegant salons. A string quintet accompaniment allows the piano to bob and weave and still keep up without difficulty. It's a nimble solution to needing a lot of rehearsal time for an orchestra to sensitively accompany a soloist without a conductor. The first piano concerto predated Chopin's arrival in Paris. He performed it just before his departure from Poland. Like a lot of works, the composing and publishing order are out of sync, so this is actually his second concerto. Chopin himself wrote, "Here you doubtless observe my tendency to do wrong against my will. As something has involuntarily crept into my head through my eyes, I love to indulge it, even though it may be all wrong." The first movement is filled with a kind of statuesque longing in the lengthy introduction, and when the piano takes the main theme, we're instantly drawn into his personal world of longing. Of the second movement, Chopin wrote, inspired by a soprano he was enamored of, "This is like dreaming in beautiful springtime by moonlight." These beautifully delicate variations convey a childlike innocence. Of the Paris premiere, a critic wrote, "There is spirit in these melodies, there's fantasy in these passages, and everywhere there's originality." Now, one original feature of the concerto is actually an omission. There's no cadenza. Obviously, Chopin did not feel the showman's need to stop and dazzle any more than he already had. The almost stomping dance of the last movement rondo theme heralds such flights of virtuosity that perhaps had not been heard before. Rachmaninoff clearly loved Chopin's music, creating a set of variations on a theme of his in 1903 when he was 30 years old. Now, interestingly, there's another subtle link between Chopin and Rachmaninoff through an Irishman named John Field. Some of you pianists out there may have been raised on Clementi's finger exercises. This Italian virtuoso and piano manufacturer in London at the end of the 18th century became a mentor to the brilliant John Field. Together, they traveled to Vienna, where Field impressed Beethoven, and then on to St. Petersburg, where he ended up staying, as it were, in the field, to sell pianos. Having settled there, he lived an extravagant life and taught Rachmaninoff's grandfather, who inspired the youthful genius pianist at the end of the century. Incidentally, John Field is referenced glancingly by Tolstoy in War and Peace. Field's connection to Chopin is through the lyrical seduction of the nocturne, which, it is said, he invented. If you listen to any of his 18 delightful miniatures, you could easily mistake it for Chopin. It's the lingering line combined with virtuosic, almost operatic flourishes which suspend time and take your breath away. I think Rachmaninoff would have approved of Inon Barnatan's arrangement of his symphonic dances for full orchestra. There's a chamber orchestra version, which is often used in lab orchestras for teaching student conductors. There's also a version for 2 organs and another for 2 pianos, which Rachmaninoff actually made and played with Horowitz in Beverly Hills. And today you're going to witness the final distillation to just 1 piano by Inon. It seems like an impossible task. How do you reduce this vast orchestral landscape to 8 fingers and 2 thumbs? Rachmaninoff's genius as a pianist was captured during the Second World War with the Philadelphia Orchestra and Stokowski conducting. He came to the United States after the 1917 Russian Revolution and needed to perform to make a living. This restricted his composing life to such an extent that he wrote only 6 works during his last 25 years. But what masterpieces they are! The final one is the Symphonic Dances, which combines his brooding romanticism with more modern syncopated rhythms. The first movement begins almost militaristically with a simple arpeggiated gesture that will grow and expand exponentially. In this movement, he also quotes his First Symphony. And here's how it sounds for 2 pianos. One distinctive feature of this movement is the use of the saxophone, which Ravel had used recently so effectively in his orchestration of Mussorgsky's piano work, Pictures at an Exhibition. Now, this is not a jazzy saxophone, but rather an operatic lover. Like a lot of late 19th century composers, Rachmaninoff explores the parameters of the waltz in the second movement. The music flows from innocence to decadence in a heartbeat. Let's hear how Inon transposes this to the piano. A formal feature that Rachmaninoff inherited from Tchaikovsky is the scherzo within a slower movement. And here Rachmaninoff is fleet of foot and fancy-free. The final movement is a virtuosic tour de force which includes one of Rachmaninoff's favorite motifs, the Dies Irae, the Day of Wrath, which Berlioz so brilliantly introduced in his Symphonie Fantastique. Rachmaninoff was introduced at an early age to liturgical music by his grandmother, who took him to Russian Orthodox services. While he was inspired by some aspects of church music, he was not a church-going Christian, perhaps because of the stigma attached to his marrying his cousin, Natalia Satina. They had 2 daughters, to whom he was devoted. In fact, his reluctance to be away from his family forced him to turn down multiple offers to become the music director of both the Boston and the Cincinnati orchestras. Not far from the end, there is a touching note in the score which says, "Alleluia." It's a watershed moment from which the music gathers steam for the grand finale. The syncopation is infectious and seems to call to composers at the end of the 20th century. And once again, here is Inon. Rachmaninoff lived in Beverly Hills the last couple of years of his life for health reasons. He was a great friend of Horowitz, who was responsible for getting the backstage elevator installed at the Ambassador Auditorium, and they also had dinners with Stravinsky. Living in the US, Rachmaninoff maintained a Russian-style household with servants and a degree of luxury, including travel in his own train carriage with a piano installed, provided by his fame and his wealth that had eluded him, despite considerable success, during the first almost 50 years of his life. During a particularly difficult period following the failure of his first symphony, he went to visit his idol, Tolstoy, hoping to gain inspiration that would break his writer's block. His friend, the great singer Shaliapin, and he performed a song Rachmaninoff had written called Fate. It quotes Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. After the performance, Tolstoy poured cold water on the proceedings when he said dismissively that really what ordinary people need and want is simple folk melodies, not intellectual diatribes. Not long after this, he received help from a hypnotherapist, Dr. Nikolai Dahl, to whom endless gratitude, because the next piece he wrote was his miraculous second piano concerto. Rachmaninoff's fate was complicated and, like his other idol, Tchaikovsky, often filled with inner struggle. But his music, in an almost cinematic way, sweeps us along on a journey of the soul which is deeply romantic, human, and particularly at the end of the dances you're about to hear, filled with energetic optimism. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Inon. It's just wonderful having you here in Pasadena. I feel that we're really lucky to have you because despite everything, despite this pandemic, you have continued to be incredibly busy.
Yeah, I know, it surprised me myself. I mean, I was looking forward to some time off and somehow ended up doing a lot of different things. But you know, it's wonderful. I love being busy. I love keeping busy, and I love playing. So.
Well, you told me earlier that your last performance, it was going to be with the Chicago Symphony. In the middle of March, it was canceled.
Yeah.
And then you dove into this monastic life for a little while, working on the symphonic dances.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an amazing feat that in 1 month's time, you could learn Dorico to enter everything that you were transcribing, from the large orchestra version to the single piano, and you could learn this program, enter everything, and learn the piece, so that you could then perform it this summer and then perform it with us now.
You know, it was such a godsend to have that project. First of all, I've always wanted to do this transcription. I've always felt that Rachmaninoff himself did a transcription for 2 pianos of this piece, from the orchestra to 2 pianos, but I always felt that it would sound really great on 1 piano. And then there was this recording of Rachmaninoff that surfaced a few years ago, this private recording where he's playing the piece on 1 piano for the conductor before the premiere. And that really got me thinking, oh, I really have to do this transcription, but when? So as soon as all concerts got canceled, and as you said, that was kind of, my concert with the Chicago Symphony got canceled an hour and a half before the performance, and then no more concerts. So as soon as that happened, I said, finally I have time to learn how to use notation software and how to, and really delve. And I started early in the morning and finished late at night. I would, start, and before I knew it, a whole day has passed and a whole month has passed. And it was, at that time of the pandemic where everything was so uncertain, and suddenly found myself at home, it was just wonderful to spend some time with this music. Mm-hmm. And then being able to program it in concerts afterwards was an added bonus. So,
well, this has been your second summer with the La Jolla Music Society Summerfest, and we had a great discussion the other day about programming. And of course, your first year, which was last year, you had a large number of musicians. Was it, how many people did you have?
Something like 80 or 90 musicians.
80 or 90 coming through over how many weeks?
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
And so this summer, what did you end up with?
Last year was my first year as artistic director and as music director. And then this summer, I was adamant, as you are, that we have to do something. We can't just stop the music. And rather than having the 80 or 90 musicians, 15 to 18 programs that were already planned, everybody was invited. I decided everything was going to be small scale, 1 hour concerts. Only 7 musicians came, and we did this type of very intimate festival, which I really loved, actually. I think that this pandemic taught us a little bit about intimacy and different sides of intimacy. Mm-hmm. There is an intimacy in visiting, being with the audience from your living room, or doing this concerto with just 6 people. It's a new kind of intimacy, and I really enjoyed this aspect of it. As much as it was a challenge, there were aspects of it that really were very special for me. And also being able to stop the traveling and really devote time to be at home and to practice and to kind of be with myself and my family. And then with the festival, to spend this intense time with these people. And that was, for many of us, the first time we played with anybody else since the pandemic began. And it was so special to hear music live again with other people and play with other people. So I'm very, very lucky and fortunate, and I'm thrilled that it's continuing, and I'm thrilled to be here as well.
Well, I look forward to bringing you back to play a concerto, not with just a small chamber group, but with our whole orchestra. It'll be a privilege to have you back. But to hear you play the Chopin First Piano Concerto and record it with several takes. I mean, you just played, you played for about 6 hours to record this program. You recorded the symphonic dances, you played through the whole thing twice as well. it fascinates me that you've got this kind of focus to be able to have the energy and the mental acuity to pull it all together under this kind of pressure with all the cameras. What in your training enabled you to be able to do that?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I think I spend a lot of time, I mean, when I'm practicing at home, I'm practicing for many, many hours. If I'm recording for many hours. I think the music really, what I found is the music carries you through. Whenever you think you're tired, whenever you're, slightly cross-eyed, and then you start playing, and the music just takes over. And that's the most amazing feeling, where you're thinking, there's just no way that I can. So I think in some ways, not stopping and just keep going and playing this wonderful music, it really, it feeds me, and almost impossible to get tired. Only when I'm done, only when I stop is when I realize how tired I am. Until then, it's really, it's such a joy to do it and to share this music and to be able to play again.
Well, you bring tremendous joy to all of us. Thank you so much, Inon.